Hello, my lovelies, and welcome to the Heartland Hot Dish podcast. This is where we come to the table and rediscover the connection and meaning to our food and culinary treasures of the Great Lakes region. Join us as we discover the traditions and stories woven into the fabric of the Heartland cuisine, from the iconic dishes that define the Midwest to the hidden gems waiting to be discovered. We'll take you on a mouth-watering journey through the diverse culinary landscape of the Great Lakes area. Get ready to indulge your senses and ignite your appetite as we explore the rich tapestry of flavors that make up the Heartland Hot Dish. Okay, my lovelies. So in the room today, we've got a nice, merry bunch of folks. We've got Marcy, Chris, and Daniel joining us. And today we're going to be talking about Syracuse potatoes. You know, it's Syracuse potatoes, but I'm just glad we're talking about potatoes. It is my people's food.
I need to just jump in right away because it's not just Syracuse potatoes. It's specifically Syracuse salt potatoes.
We
Right.
can't forget about the salt.
Right. And Marcy is, this is the thing that is of Marcy's heart, but close to mine. And I'm looking forward to talking about
I feel like your New Yorker is coming out very strong today.
Daniel's excited.
He is excited. So, Marcy, get us started off with a little brief background history for the Syracuse potatoes. I know this is something you wanted to talk about for weeks and weeks now.
For weeks and weeks, because my love of salt potatoes goes back years and years. Of course, who doesn't love salt and potatoes? But especially when those things come together. And then traditionally, these are also served with butter. So you have like these three ingredients that, of course, just speak to the heart and the palate. But I tasted my first salt potato with my ex-husband's family. My ex-husband is from Alfred, New York, which is a very, very small town southwest of Syracuse. So when we went to go back and visit his family, whether it was for the holidays or just a random visit, they typically did have salt potatoes offered as a side at our family meal. My ex's mother grew up Irish Catholic, has an Irish Catholic background, and so this was something that goes way back in her family. And I will just never forget that first meal where she served them upon his request and us sitting down, and it was just love at first bite with this salt encrusted potato with the crispy skin and the creamy interior and just dipping it in that golden melted butter. It was just absolutely amazing. So even after moving on after my divorce, this was a recipe that I took with me that I still cook on a regular basis. It's simple, it's delicious. I can take it to gatherings with friends and family, and people love them. Kids in particular, but even grown-ups, dogs, everyone loves a good salt potato.
I love that you closed your eyes into that magical place where you transported yourself back there instantaneously. It brought me joy. Those are the moments. As a chef, that's all I really want. That person that time travels back in that moment, right back to those salt potatoes. I think it's funny that the potato, when you talk about salt potatoes and butter, all I can think about is rich potatoes, mashed potatoes, and not necessarily salty boiled potatoes in that world. I think it's a really magical moment you just had. For the two others, we got Chris and Daniel in here. I mean, for you and that kind of history of potatoes, not necessarily Syracuse salt potatoes, what's your foundational potato of happiness?
I think all potatoes for me are the foundational potato of happiness, right? It is hard. I think I read this thing and about the science of potato eating, that potatoes just make human beings happy. There's some sort of chemical reaction that happens in our brains. But, the first time I tried Syracuse salt potatoes was at the Altamont County Fair. And it was a similar type of thing. It was like, salt potatoes in summer? I'm going to have, it's hot, it's the fair. And yet here's this thing that's a hot boiled potato in melted butter. And this is a thing we're going to do. Okay, well, let's go for it. And dear God, those are good. Right. And it has inspired me that now, I think of salt potatoes as not just a dish, but also a cooking style, right? So this is now just how I make potatoes at home all the time. And I keep boiled potatoes in the refrigerator just to have on hand because they make me happy. And I may just have one cold with a little bit of Japanese Kewpie mayonnaise, and maybe if I'm gilding the lily, which I'm guilty of doing much of the time, a little bit of white truffle salt on the top of that. But I can
Oh, you went to
also,
truffle salt? Oh,
oh,
God.
You're
That is a
taking this up
conversation. We are
a
not going to have a
whole new
conversation
notch.
about truffle
sure,
salts.
fair. That's for another time, and that's far away from the humble beginnings of the Syracuse salt potato. But I will also just take those boiled potatoes, dice them up, and then fry them with some meat ends and make a lovely little hash. So those are my my potato loves and happy places.
Interesting. I have to say I'm the odd man out here, right? Because I'm maybe the least foodie of everybody. I am from New York, though, which I found interesting. I guess the three of us from New York. I grew up downstate in Brooklyn, so very Italian neighborhood, and I don't think potatoes feature too prominently in Italian cuisine. Maybe gnocchi, right? But that wasn't really where we were going. I would have to say for me, potatoes are the more mashed cream, salt, butter type, with the skin on, which I think is pretty important with when you're having mashed potatoes. So another confession or a confession, I've never had salt potatoes. So this is going to be both a learning experience for me and potentially maybe a new love.
It's okay. You had God's will there of picking mashed potatoes as the win, because that is clearly the correct way to eat a potato. Okay, Marcy, you can take us down our salt potato dreams right now.
Let's explore the Syracuse salt potato and just kind of the origins. It's interesting that you guys brought up all these different forms of potatoes because Chris, you even just mentioned salt, butter, creaminess, and these are all, very, very much like characteristics of the salt potato. But they basically started in Syracuse. So Syracuse is also known as the Salt City. And in the 19th century, you had Irish and German immigrants mining for salt out of, and I may butcher this, the Onondaga Lake.
It's kind of perfect.
Like-
I even listened to that 3 times to try to make that right if I had to say it.
Did you listen to it on Google, Kieran? In the slow speech. So yes, I had to listen to it a couple times just to make sure I was getting it right. But in the 1870s, these immigrants would take the brine from the Onondaga Lake, and there is these little shelters. They're kind of like shed-like buildings, and they're called salt blocks. And in these salt blocks, you had these ginormous 60-gallon kettles where they would boil this brine. And then once the brine was boiled, whatever was left over inside the kettles, that was scraped up and sold up the Erie Canal as consumable salt, right? What we know as table salt. So what the workers would do is while this brine was boiling, they would bring these little potatoes and they would boil them in these kettles, and that would be lunch. And eventually this took off as a thing, right? And all of the local like Irish taverns and saloons at the end of the workday when they were drinking their suds, like
Can't imagine why they wanted their patrons to eat something extra salty while they were serving beverages to them.
Right. Yeah, it totally makes sense, right? It's,
Yep.
it's like eating pretzels or popcorn in a
Heck
bar.
yeah. Good
Totally.
bartender wants a salty device in front of their patrons every time.
So the first like maybe recorded menu of this was there's the Keefe Brothers Tavern in Syracuse, and the Keefe Brothers were Irish Catholic immigrants, and so their families also served these at their family meals. But this is where it was originally recorded that salt potatoes were on the menu in Syracuse. And then by the 20th century, it had really kind of taken off even outside the Finger Lakes area into Buffalo, into Albany. It's funny, Daniel, you mentioned trying them for the first time in summer is very much something that goes hand in hand with barbecue, which is a very summery thing, right? Clam bakes. That's where you'll often find these in the New York area in terms of feasting them and enjoying them as a side. But what
And it also plays into their seasonality too, right? Because historically they're made, from new potatoes, which are growing in the summer, late spring, early summer.
perfect? Yes, absolutely. They are made from baby potatoes, very young little babies.
My people understand. I was talking just before we started. There is a new potato season in the UK, and the first potatoes in the new potato season go for a fortune back home. They come from a specific place in England. And when you get them, I mean, we're talking like $180, $200 a pound for the very first baby potatoes of the season. They are celebrated. My people definitely understand the potato. So that variety of having that baby potato where the starches are really low, the sugar content, and they're not waxy, they've got that like fluffiness to them is super important in that game.
The fluffiness is super important. Those are expensive potatoes.
They are expensive potatoes.
Were they like picked by unicorns? And
I could say other things, but no, yes, unicorns being ridden on the backs of other things. Yeah.
Right.
But you do not have to pay that much money to have a wonderful salt potato. That's the amazing thing about these Syracuse ones, right? They're working people's food, right? It's a very common thing.
They're working people's food, exactly, and you can feed mass armies of people with them, which is what I love about them. But generally, traditionally speaking, they are the baby Yukon Golds. They're the new potatoes. While red potatoes are not traditional, you can of course use the baby red creamers. I'm not exactly sure why they're not traditional. I do know people have said you can't really see the salt crystals on the red skin, so maybe that's a deterrent. Maybe they're not as creamy, but what ends up happening is it's this magical process, and they say if you let's talk for a second about how much salt you're adding here. So it's approximately 2 tablespoons per 1 cup of liquid, or 1 cup per 3 pounds of boiled potatoes. A ridiculous amount of salt.
I'm really sad we didn't use the metric system here.
I'm
The
sorry.
pride in my soul.
I'm sorry. We should switch over to the metric system. I totally agree. But we're talking about an uncomfortable amount of salt, to the point where some people do say if the salt is still dissolving in the water, it's not enough. You keep adding more. And then what ends up happening is this magical process, or if you want to get scientific about it, there's a couple things going on here. Some people say that the salt drives up the temperature of the boiling point of the water to where it steams the inside of the potato and makes it very, very moist and very, very creamy.
So the science is that it lowers the point at which water can boil at. Fun of the game of having to explain it to commie chefs all the time. It changes the temperature that water will rapidly boil at, so it can boil more rapidly, quicker, cooks things more evenly.
Which cooks them more evenly. So you get this creamy inside of the potato. The skin itself is thinned out, and then the salt crystals cling to the skin of the potato. And then the other thought is that there's excess liquid, of course, inside a potato, right? They are very watery, that somehow that water is drawn out through the skin towards the salty solution in the pot. And then while the skin acts as a barrier to prevent salt water from penetrating the potatoes, the moisture in the potato still can find its way out. And then once the water leaves, you have this densely packed starchy goodness on the inside of the potato. But the key is to leave these whole. You don't want the salt inside the potatoes, because then they are way too salty.
Like, yeah, they are.
They are way too
Made that mistake trying to make Syracuse potatoes at the Roadhouse eons ago.
Did you cut them?
Oh, yeah, I cut them the first time. Did I read the recipe or do my research fully the first time? No. The magic is that if you ever make a stock or a soup or a sauce too salty in a kitchen, like a big pot, and you have messed up and your head chef is kicking around, your fix is to boil cut potatoes into it, because they're like little sponges. They will soak it up. You over salt a liquid, chuck some potatoes in there. They're going to fix that right up. But yeah, if you cut a salt potato, it is not a good place to be.
But speaking of the recipe and the cooking, Marcy, when you do this at home, are you actually measuring this out? Because when I make salt potatoes, there's no measuring going in. I am just throwing in handfuls of salt. I'm just doing it by eye. The water gets nice and clear.
Okay, I just cried again. Thanks, guys. No metric. We're using cups. And it's great. Wonderful.
I'm not running a restaurant here. I don't need to make the same salt potatoes day after day. They just need to be delicious.
So I did originally use a recipe. I did originally use my ex-mother-in-law's recipe, but over time, as with many recipes, you do kind of start to eyeball it, and it does become that gauge of if I see it dissolving too quickly, then throw more salt in until you don't see it dissolving anymore.
You're my accountant buddy over there. You're Mr. Numbers. You're weighing everything, right? Every time you cook.
Yeah, in metric.
Oh my
Metric.
thank
Yeah.
God. I feel so much better in my day now. The two of you can sit over there. Me and Chris will cuddle in the corner over here.
Years and kilos.
There you go.
It's good to know how we can torture you.
Go for it.
So anyway, so we were talking about like this magical scientific process, and then what ends up happening as you pull the potatoes out and they start to dry, then the salt clings to the skin of the potatoes. The skin starts to tighten up, and then you just have this beautiful, beautiful crust. The inside is creamy. It's incredibly creamy and flavorful. And then once you dunk that, like we were talking about earlier, into that melted butter, it's just one of the most amazing things. It's simple, it's delicious. You bite into it, and it's just like this creamy, flavorful, buttery amazingness.
You dry panning? Like, are you reducing that down to nothing? Are you pulling them out, letting them dry in the oven? Like, what is your end game? Like, because salt potatoes, on some level, like, you can dry pan them, you can boil them down to nothing.
Oh.
Yeah,
Wait,
yeah.
So when you say dry pan them,
Yeah.
Can you elaborate for those who are
just
not
cover them
chefs?
with the salty water,
Hmm?
and then you boil them. You simmer it down, and the water disappears.
Oh, wow.
Literally dry pan them. You can also remove them from the salty brine
Mhm.
and then put them in a light, warm oven to get that extra crispy outside. Okay, going to the chefy brain of like, you want to do all of these things to make all of these things happy. Or are you just pulling them out, letting them dry for a second, and then putting them in the buttery goodness?
I have a feeling that you are not from upstate New York. Or central New York, if we want to split hairs.
I was
as
feeling
New
like I
Yorkers.
wanted to mash them instantaneously in my dreams.
Right. Nobody in Syracuse is. I love the way that you do this, right? Like, I love the sort of chef brain behind this. But I'm curious to hear how Marcy does this, and then I'll share how I do it.
I've never dry panned them. That's actually interesting, and I might have to try that now. But I just take it to the whole new level of, instead of just letting them drain in a colander, I do like to kind of, because I want them to dry out evenly, then I do put them in like a sheet pan or something, like lined with so something to kind of draw that moisture out more, like a paper
What do
towel
you
or
do
something.
with your salty brine afterwards?
I end up tossing it. I don't do anything with it. I know, Kieran, I'm sorry.
Eyes twitching.
It's full of starchy goodness too.
It's
I'm
full
sure.
of great starchy,
Yeah.
salty goodness. You can make those into crystals. And so that when I did it, back in the Roadhouse days, we did a special for it, and we would put malt vinegar on those in that water too. And then when it evaporated, you had like a starchy salt with the vinegar on it, and we could use it for the chips when I did fish and chips, and you'd have like pre-vinegared salt. It was magic time.
That's brilliant, and that's very chefy, right?
That's what they were doing over those salty marshes back in the day, right?
Plus,
Right, Chris? I feel like that was the happy place for them. Yeah.
Sounds like it. Certainly sounds like
it's
it.
very chefy. Don't throw anything away, right?
Yeah, I feel like I'm here today to make Kieran cry.
Okay. I'm sorry. So
Success.
Daniel, are you saving the water? What are you doing?
No, no, that water is going right down the drain, right? Salt is not, salt may have used to have been expensive, but now it's not. Even the fancy salt that I use, I don't use the truffle salt for boiling the
Thank
potatoes,
God.
but I do use French gray salt.
I break into your house and remove all of the truffle salt from your house. Did you know you talked about the Erie Canal where the salt, sorry, we can go back, but where the salt came down, they raised taxes and paid for the Erie Canal from Syracuse salt production.
Oh,
Did you know that?
did not know that.
That is the coolest thing.
That's
They sell salt by the bushel back then, which I just think that of things you wouldn't think that are sold by a bushel is a bushel of salt is an odd thing. But yeah, they raised I think it was 6 pennies on a bushel, paid for the Erie Canal back in the day for the debt on it.
that's a lot.
Somebody's going to check
Okay.
that who's listening to us and
Yeah.
then leave something in the comments, and I just made up a fallacy.
Actually, it was 7 pennies.
And I'm sure I will get pilloried by my friends in New York for boiling my salt potatoes in French gray sea salt. But that's what I do because you're cooking with very few ingredients and you want everything to really work as hard as it can. If you're using iodized salt, God bless you. That's what you love. You should do that. But for me, that has just a taste that does not quite be as rich and round
See,
as.
That's the bit where like the difference in the salt. That's where you have to weigh it. You weigh like iodine salt. It's so much heavier Like just by volume to weight,
Yes.
it's crazy. Like I don't even mess around. Like curing things, if you have been in a kitchen where that's all you had for a minute and there's no salt delivery coming, and well, I guess I got to use this. You need to weigh that stuff. I'm just going back to my metric dreams.
If I were curing meat, I would be using gram scales. I'm boiling potatoes in salt. I'm doing that by the handful. And I'm dumping out that water and I'm putting them in a colander. And then I am watching that magic happen right in front of my eyes. I'm watching the water evaporate and I'm watching it leave that beautiful salt crust, right? It's I don't do Christmas trees, but I imagine this is like the flock. What is it called with the white on the trees? Flock?
Talking about the like silvery, like little tinsel stuff.
No, there's like white stuff that people put on Christmas trees.
Like spray?
Yeah, something like that. But it's a beautiful sort of. It looks like this snowy, dewy sort of thing that that happens
Shimmering.
right on the potatoes, and it just
Were you outside with your glasses and the snow just caught on the outside of your glasses when you went in?
no, but it's salt and it has this beautiful crystalline structure.
Again, is this a big pot of water or just covering the potatoes?
Oh, so it's really just covering the
Okay.
right, and and I will start it. This gets a little bit too intense, but I will start it from cold, right? So I put the potatoes in the cold water, start it from cold. I don't put the salt in until I start seeing a little bit of movement of the water because I want that to.
We talked about why potatoes in salty water is good. Cold water is always good with a potato because it allows the center to cook at the same time the outside does. It comes together, the outside and the inside. So I'm very happy with that.
Thank you. I'm glad that not everything I do makes you cry, but I also can't imagine that this is necessarily how they're doing it at the fair when they're doing giant cauldrons of potatoes for everybody, because that would take a tremendous amount of time.
And they're probably using iodized salt, right?
Right, and right, but hopefully in New York, my friends there are still using good real butter. I'm using probably better butter, but that is me and gilding the lily. But there's no drying it on sheet pans. There's no crisping it in the oven. Right, it's really just letting that process of cooking them in the salt do its magic. Right, and like Marcy said, right, it's texture of that skin, right? It just snaps and it pops. And we were talking a little bit about hot dogs and about natural casings, right? Learning about that and learning about those textural contrasts, that's there in this potato for pennies.
So you have just pulled the potatoes out of this water. No time drying them. They go straight to Buttertown.
No, they actually sit there and they dry out in the air for a little bit, and they still stay warm, and then
It's
they'll
almost
go
like putting them in an oven and drying them out, but just you're doing room temperature.
You can imagine that.
But the drying process is key, right? You have to let them set and dry because that's when the skin starts to crisp up and the salt really starts to.
And for people
That's
making this
correct.
at home that are not Kieran and doing it his way, you're talking like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Like, what's that time frame?
In chef terms,
Yeah.
Kieran, until it's done.
Until it is done. That's super helpful for anyone who's never made Syracuse.
Well, when I'm making these, I'm usually making other things, so they will just sit in the colander until I'm ready to use them.
That's because for me, especially with them being young baby potatoes, which is the best time to do this. So if you're listening, you're like, I'd like to make this. As soon as you get the potato season starts up, using those baby potatoes is the way forward. When you get later in the season, you get starchy potatoes, you got to be more picky on the potato you're going to pick. I know we're going to talk about that. But you got to be really like specific about if it is an extra starchy potato, if it's going to be a little waxier of a potato, that time frame from when you've stopped cooking it to eating it becomes more important. If it's got a low count of starchiness, it's not going to be waxy. You can leave it around for a while, but if you leave a waxy, starchy potato, things are going to go bad.
You don't do this with starchy potatoes when it's not in the season, right? When they're new, it doesn't matter. But if you are doing this later, starchy potatoes, and for anybody who's listening who doesn't really know, russets not the potato for this.
No, they have to be those young little potatoes. Think like I know if you go to the store now, they have these pre-packaged little baby potatoes that you can buy, and they come with little packets of seasoning, right? And you throw a little.
You?
Yes.
If you are in New
Okay.
York, you can actually buy a sack that is called salt
Seen that?
potato.
Yep.
Yeah, this is not just salt potatoes though. I think this is trying to again appeal to more of that like Midwestern palate, or you have like the pre-packaged seasoning, just like you would see like if you're making that dry ranch at home or whatever, like those dry sauces. And you sprinkle them over the potatoes, throw a little olive oil on them. You can microwave or throw these things in the oven. It's not the same thing, folks. It is not the same thing. It might do in a pinch, but you're not going to get because you're essentially steaming it in the microwave, right? You're not going to get that crispy, beautiful, thin skin that we're getting from salt potatoes.
Chris, have you seen these packs of seasoning on potatoes?
No.
Okay,
No, I have
right,
not.
good.
No. But I was going to ask, do you ever add oil in the water, garlic, aromatics, things like that? Or is that
No.
heresy?
Oh,
No,
Chris,
it's heresy.
I'm closer.
You can. So people do have added freshly chopped herbs over the years. That's become a thing: parsley, chives, tarragon, and
Said
that's.
none of the herbs I would use. I love that.
But it was. Are you thinking more
Thyme and
provincial?
rosemary. All I
Yeah,
ever
yeah.
use is thyme and rosemary and bay leaf. Those are the three gospels in my world on a daily basis.
Right, so more provincial herbs, but again, we're thinking like Irish, German background, not French. So like not Italian.
I think you just called a Brit a Frenchman. I don't know what just happened.
British. So these have become acceptable things to do over the decades with these potatoes, but nothing more than that.
But those are still at the end, right? You
those are
boil, right? You're going to mix those fresh herbs with the butter and the cooked potato.
What? You
Yeah.
don't put them in the water? What the? Ooh, Chris is agreeing with me over there, just so you know.
Yeah.
He wants to put it in the water right at the beginning.
You're going to boil the parsley?
Well, I wouldn't use parsley, clearly. It's not God's herb. That would be thyme and rosemary. Or I will say I've loved my summer and winter savory. They're like thyme and rosemary had the baby, and then you just have to use one herb, and that's always fun. No, like really? Not in the water when you boil them?
Boiling parsley? No.
No.
Okay. It's for a little bit of that freshness, to sort of brighten things up a little bit at the end.
Yep. And I've even been to dinners where it's an option. It's not something that like these herbs are not automatically added, but it's something that you can take a little spoon and sprinkle on if you would like.
Are you judged if you use that? Oh, okay. That's good.
I mean, you're probably judged.
Maybe quietly, silently,
Internally,
I'd
been
eyed
judged,
from across the
Chris.
table.
There's a lot of judgment going on
I've
today.
been found wanting. I thought he was a chef, but then he went and got the herbs.
But at least you are going to be chopping the herbs fresh. I horrified about the people who will be using the pre-chopped parsley.
See, okay. Look,
Right.
Be friends again now.
Thank you.
So I think the idea being, like, so when I was thinking about these salt potatoes in today's conversation, of course, I was thinking about all the ways we enjoy salty potatoes in our culture. Of course, French fries being the number one thing that pops into my head. And I do think about like my boyfriend's kids, for example, who love potatoes and love salt. And so this is right up their alley. And so while we do make potatoes for them in various forms, including mashed potatoes, and they do love their mashed potatoes, this is one of their favorites because they get that immediate gratification of the salt and the potato. But for them, it's more of a vehicle for ketchup, right? So
Another one of God's fine.
Whatever they can douse the ketchup on, that's why they love it.
You're using Hunt's, I'm going to be really upset.
It's not Hunt's. No, it is Heinz.
Not
Organic.
sponsored by either of them, but
Right. I'm sorry to say, but it's for us like as grown-ups, like for my boyfriend and myself, it's more about like a vehicle for vinegar. We did talk about vinegar, but it's the simplicity really of the salt potatoes that's their beauty, because then like with many side dishes, you don't want them to overpower whatever your main is. So, and whether it is the barbecue or like the clam bakes that we talked about. I've served these with grilled steak before. There's a lot of different things you can do with them. And one of the more popular dishes that these are often served with is the Cornell chicken. which is a recipe that was it's from Cornell University. So again, we're getting back to our New York roots, right?
It is so good.
It is so good.
So good. Have you ever had that?
Never.
Is this a thing that is even on your
that just
radar?
flew right past me.
Oh dear God! What we may need to do a whole nother
Dinner
show on.
time. That's what I just said. I don't have to. Chris, we're not worrying about dinner tonight. Oh, Daniel is making
can't-
us some delicious chicken.
No, I'm not.
So yeah, one of the reasons I did bring up vinegar is because this is very much a vinegar-based dish. It's typically a broiler fryer chicken that is marinated in apple cider vinegar. So you get that snappiness, that tart flavor from the vinegar alongside of those salt potatoes, and they really just go hand in hand. So while you're not putting the vinegar on the potatoes, so to speak, you're still getting that flavor combination.
When you're serving them, are they whole or crushed up? Like you
Kieron.
put the butter on the potatoes.
Kieron.
Have you crushed them, or are you just rolling them in butter?
It's a good question, and I feel like we have failed because we haven't communicated this.
Oh, I didn't
clearly,
hear this.
But no, right?
At what point are they whipped?
Yes. I've peeled them, and now we're mashing them, buddy.
Can we mute these guys? No, I just
I have the controls.
okay. No, they are served whole. You do dip them in the butter whole, and you do that, of course, to retain the moisture on the inside and that crispiness on the outside. Because the minute you do break them open, then you lose that texture, the beauty of that texture.
You want to enjoy that. You want to have that experience in your mouth. You want your teeth to be the things that break through that skin, right?
I want that butter in the middle of the potato.
Well, your second bite. That's your second bite.
I want that to be my only bite.
And when I had these served at the fair, right, they were served in a bowl and the bowl had the butter in there. It was like they were swimming in a butter soup, right? It was just rounds of potatoes, right?
This butter soup.
Oh my God,
Butter soup. It's like when you throw the whole cobs of corn into the melted butter and just let them float around in
And
there.
I'm now. You haven't answered my questions. I've got we've now not crushed them. Is this butter soft or is it melted?
It's melted.
Oh God.
No, it's like, have you guys ever done like a shrimp boil?
Yes.
Okay. It's like that. And again, it's like when we think of like a crawfish boil or shrimp boil, those potatoes in the boil are whole. They're whole.
Yes, they are.
Your face right now. It's brilliant.
This will not be posted with a video.
I'm dying to know Kieron's problem with the melted butter part of this. As a chef, from a chef's
Oh,
perspective.
see, I want all the different textures and experiences and temperatures. Like if I can have something crispy and soft, and if I can have something warm and cold, I want to have an explosion of all different things in my life. And when you melt butter, it changes the homogenization of it. So that emulsification that happens when you make butter is magic. A melted butter loses some of those natural flavors that are in there. So for me, when you've got a warm loaf of bread and you spread warm butter, room temperature butter on it, the magic of that is completely different. Do I want it fridge cold? Heck no. I want it so that it hits my palate and melts in my mouth right then and there. So to pour melted butter where you've lost some of the buttery magic, yeah. And also not peeling the potatoes and mashing them together to get that buttery soft goodness in there. Like when you make mash, I mean, Chris, when you make mash, do you melt your butter or fold it in soft butter?
Not melted. It's
Yeah, see, it's an accountant thing. I'm telling you,
Is it
Mr. Numbers over there got it down. He's coming to the kitchen with me.
But I hear you on the texture thing, and I was actually I never heard of this until recently. As we were preparing for this, I was listening to another podcast talk about salt potatoes, and they had experienced them in the form of and this is another regional New York thing that may blow your mind. It's called a garbage plate, but garbage plate has been trademarked, so people from Rochester will just call them plates. And
Creative.
thank you. Right, I can't take credit for that. But but it's a weird thing to be able to trademark garbage plates, as if somebody would trademark Coney hot dogs, right? And only one place could call them Conies, right? That's unthinkable. But I don't want to get distracted with these plates. Or the traditional garbage plate, the original trademark garbage plate, right? You get to choose your protein, and it can be either a hamburger patty or a hot dog, and it comes with macaroni salad, and potatoes. And then it has a chili sauce, like a meaty chili on the top, and we've got onions, and we've
Not
got mustard,
Cincinnati chili, is it?
hot sauce.
Not Cincinnati.
Not Cincinnati
Okay,
chili.
we'll
It's
find
it's its own thing. And it sounds horrifying. And I know because the first time I heard it, I was horrified. And then I tried one, and I was really pleasantly surprised at how it all really worked well together. And I shouldn't be, because there are, hundreds of thousands of people who love this thing, right? People.
It looks horrifying.
Oh, yes, it does. Oh, most definitely.
Describe.
Right. But instead of the diced potatoes and serve the home fried potatoes, one version of this was served with salt potatoes, right? And then this should appeal to Kieron because he gets all of his textures and textures and temperatures, right? And
Yeah, I mean, sorry, we can go back to butter. I was gonna say, because there was a few things when we were doing the research into the salt potatoes and what it is and like the things that it serves. I saw the burnt ends and the different things. So, what was your first experience with salt potatoes? What was it that you had first with it, back in the day?
It was, I believe, like a prime rib or something along those lines. It was something that was commonly served.
So it was more of it was just the potato that was being served with that meal.
That was a side.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then when you're at the fairs with salt potatoes, what's the norm that it goes with? Or is it just like a bucket of fries? This is this thing.
exactly, right. You go to the salt potato window to get your salt potatoes, right? And you're walking around with your little bowl and dribbling the butter down your chin.
Okay.
Is it?
Wow. Well, it is interesting. So I lived in Maine for a while, and you've got like the lobster rolls, and it's melted butter too. And I equally am mystified why you would want it melted rather than just like warm globs of butter on things.
Because it's better than mayonnaise, which is the other alternative for lobster rolls.
Well, we can all agree about.
Sure.
But there's
As we say, working for Zingerman's with mayonnaise dripping down our arms, which no one listen, guys. We love our mayonnaise.
So it's interesting, Kieron. We bring up Zingerman's, and I do work at the Roadhouse, and I was thinking again as I was preparing for this conversation today, I'm like, why haven't we had this at the Roadhouse? And you mentioned that you did when you were a chef there. So what was it typically served?
So
with?
we had done it with burnt ends back in the day.
With burnt ends,
Yeah,
okay.
and so we used to when we were doing the Thursday specials, which the Roadhouse still does today. I had done natural disasters of the United States specials. Do you remember that one?
Yes, I do.
And so it was foods. Well, there was like I remember like reading up about food history in the U.S. and there was like the molasses flood. Remember this one?
No.
Don't remember the molasses flood.
You're not.
Oh, come on, Chris. I thought that was going to be a yes. Okay, well, I did a series of foods based around where there were food disasters around the U.S. And so the Syracuse one was about a shipwreck that happened on the Erie Canal transporting potatoes. So again, New York was one of those large producers of potatoes, and there'd been a shipwreck in the Erie Canal. It might have been towards the end of that series of what it is, but like we had done an earthquake here. I'm sorry, I'm making this sound very belittled, but it was a way to like focus in on different regions of the U.S. and the reasons to have them. But yes, we had done them with burnt ends, and it was really interesting. I had boiled the pan dry and then put them in an oven to make the outside extra crispy, like a jacket potato. What's a jacket potato over here?
Baked potato.
Baked potato, okay. Jacket potatoes, so it's got extra salty, crispy on the outside, and we had made the salt into the vinegar salt and then used that as the garnish over the top. I totally knew that the vinegar on the potato wasn't really what you should do, but we had doused them in malt vinegar over the top of them as well. I mean, I couldn't resist myself.
I did.
I just got a look of very big disappointment from Marcy.
I understand, and on the one hand, don't blame you as a vinegar lover, but we do have all those bottles of vinegar where it's an option for people to add them to the potatoes.
The chef, we don't give people options.
No, you cannot substitute. But no, this is good to know because it does speak to the versatility of this potato that you can, I mean, even though like some of us might roll our eyes a little bit, add things to the potato like vinegar. You
100%.
need to douse it in ketchup in order for it to be palatable.
Well, as a chef, I'd never been introduced to it. Like to cook something in that amount of salt, like an uncomfortable, as Marcy had said it, when I didn't have weights and measures, it was an old historical cookbook that we'd used to do it from. I can't remember the book now. But it said the same thing. You need to still see the salt in the pan that won't dissolve. It's so salty, it will no longer dissolve, was the amount you needed to put in there. And I thought that was fascinating. As I'm like, okay, I can do this. There's other places where you cook proteins or meats into very salty liquids, but like this was the first time somebody had done potatoes like that. It had never made it to the UK or into Europe. And like a lot of European foods, we do a lot of very weird things. This one had never made it that far, and I found that fascinating. I will say I shouldn't say we as the Roadhouse, but we as a family have probably had them loosely over the last like 6 to 7 years. They're super delicious, and it is something that when we go to my wife's family up in Caseville, I've done it once or twice up there before, and they love them. It isn't something that is widely known, though. As somebody who's out there, this isn't something that has spread far and wide. Chris had said he hadn't heard of it at all. I don't think that like this isn't a widely consumed food that's got out there or something. And I think it is a very remarkably different style of potato when you eat it. Even though it doesn't have its softened butter folded over and it's melted, I think that textural outside is very different because it's not like a salt-baked potato. That is a completely different thing. That boiling of it definitely changes it, and being very specific about the type of potato.
And when I make them in the winter, because I absolutely make them in the winter, right? I will use I will use Yukon Gold potatoes. I will use the red potatoes, right? It's really looking for a good waxy potato, right? And really trying to find. It can be hard to find the smaller potatoes later in the season, but looking for them, segregating them out, all right, trying to choose, even if they're not quite as small, trying to find potatoes that are about the same size to go in the pan, so again, that they cook as
Yeah, I think that's the magic you just said, because you can't cut them.
That's correct.
Do not cut them at home, everyone. If you're listening to this, a cut salt potato is a bad salt potato.
Please don't cut them.
Chris, don't cut them.
Recipe.
And if you're desperate, you could, in theory, cook them at different sizes and pull them out from the water at different times, right? That gets a little bit.
Or just have
Do
multiple.
you know if the smaller potatoes were used originally when
Yes.
they were
Yeah.
always?
So it's seasonal, right? So that's the bit where you go back into that kind of food history. So I remember this from the Roadhouse days. It was much more about, it wasn't all year round. It was the new potatoes of that season because they were cheap and readily available and you get them. So when you grow potatoes, you want to thin the row. And so it was an opportunity to take some of the potatoes out of the ground early so the other potatoes could come up to full size. So you make more room for the potatoes to grow. So as a poor person, because it was poor people's food at that point, it was an opportunity. You would work a field, you clear the field of some of the potatoes that would make it easier for the other potatoes to grow. I know you're all looking at me like, oh, Kieron did some research.
That was great.
I'm wondering why they wouldn't be, geographically or globally and found elsewhere, where there may be salt lakes and, like with the convergence.
Never seen it.
Yeah.
I think that's that bit where we forget how recent an addition potato is to our diet. While it is spread far and wide and deeply rooted in all of us, it is an American thing. It's South American, right? It's the Andes. It's like 7,000 or 8,000 years old, but it only came back, when we rediscovered the Americas, and then it came back into Europe in like the 1700s. And really, we didn't understand what it was. We were smoking the potato leaves. Like that's what we thought they were in that world.
and also when we discovered they weren't poisonous, because let's not forget they are part of the nightshade family.
As everyone. Yep. Marie Antoinette had to like wear the flowers to persuade the aristocracy because it was a poor man's food as well. When it started being consumed, or what that was, she tried to persuade people that it was a good thing to eat. But yeah, the nightshade family isn't always the easiest. It's not a good name, really, for something you're trying to sell.
Nope. And I wish we could go back to lots of times when things were poor man's food, like lobster. That they couldn't give that away.
Yeah, the oysters in the River Thames, and then it was everywhere. It was everyone's food.
Yep.
So I was in looking at this for the Syracuse. I know I'd mentioned this before we started up, but there is a wonderful foundation. It's the William Pomeroy Foundation. I'm now looking down to make sure I don't mess this up. Created Hungry for History. These are like food plaques. And so one of the first ones, or at least one of the ones I found readily, was the Syracuse salt potato plaque. It was up there. Isn't that cool?
That's awesome.
So this gentleman and this foundation, the William Pomeroy Foundation, are putting up plaques all over the U.S. celebrating regional foods. It has to be something that's like pre-1970s. You've got to have it documented. It has got to have more than one ingredient. Look at the salt potatoes. They've managed to get 3. Good for them. Squeezed in there. They added the butter for history. No, and I think that like that when we talk about like what is the Heartland Hot Dish, why, and what we're talking about, that really rang true. It was actually you had put on the bottom of the notes that you'd given us pre-reading the beef on weck. Remember, right?
The beef and whack.
Yeah, that is another plaque by them. And that's actually where I found their foundation. But they're all over the US. It's not limited to a spot. You can apply. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I've got this regional food that has more than 2 ingredients, creativity known wildly, you can apply to them and they'll come and put up a plaque in your community for it. It's kind of awesome. There's one that my sister lives in Burlington, Vermont, and that's where the Michigan hot dog is. The plaque for the Michigan hot dog is in Burlington, Vermont.
It has a plaque.
It has a plaque in Burlington, Vermont. Makes
Well,
me very
because
happy.
outside of Michigan, where we call them conies, they can also be called Michigans.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah.
I know. We're going to talk about hot dogs
Oh,
very,
we
very
saw.
soon because there's a lot there.
Can we bring hot dogs to try while we're talking about them?
All right, we're coming to the end. What have we got as our burning potato-y pieces we'd like to share with everyone? Like anything from the salt potatoes or our lovely history piece. Got guys.
My burning desire is for everyone who is listening to try this at home. It is easy. It is delicious. It's one of the best things you can do with a potato at home. I think Marcy had talked about, French fries.
You know who did that? That was Jefferson.
But don't fry.
Sorry.
Don't fry at home. Right, frying is.
What? We're becoming friends again, Daniel.
I'm sorry. Well, you can fry at home. Right? I can't fry at home. It's far too dangerous for me to do that because if I started opening the window for me frying at home, everything would get fried. Right. But this is boiling in water, right? And if it does not appeal to you to do in the spring and the summer because it's hot and boiling water just sounds just like a terrible idea. Don't do it then. You can relax and be a little bit flexible. Do it in the winter. Find some Yukon Golds. Boil some water, 30 minutes at the most. As much salt as you can handle, and then maybe a little bit more. And you can thank me later.
See, I'm just sitting here and thinking boiled peanuts, boiled nuts. When we've done salty boiled nuts, peanuts.
Oh.
You were at the Roadhouse when we did that?
I wasn't there.
Oh, yeah. Boiled peanuts is
Oh,
a
yeah.
whole thing. Like, that is yummy. And when we talk about the summer, that is totally a summer thing, too. It's almost like you guys like tea in the summer, like a hot, warm cup of tea in the same way. It will make you really happy.
But historically, these all things were done outside, right?
Yeah.
Right. When the potato farmers, the salt miners were doing this.
It also
was
wasn't
outside.
desperate that it was like we have this obsession. We had just done a Tuscan dinner out at the farm recently, and some of the food is just room temperature. This isn't stuff that's meant to be served right out of the pot, boiling hot in the same way. It's more of just room temperature food. We've got so used to the food needing to be like almost scorchingly hot. What about you, Chris? What have you got as our potato-y finish for you?
Well, for me, I'm going to have to make it my business to make a batch of these at home and report back.
Nice.
I'm invited to the next podcast.
There you go.
I'm going to have to be sure to have made these.
You're just going to be sitting closer to me, Chris, in the next podcast. Maybe between me and Daniel. All right, Marcy.
Awesome.
Awesome.
It will be easy, Chris. So you can Google salt potatoes and get a million recipes, and they're all going to be very similar, maybe just a few tablespoons.
I'll put one out there with grams for you, Chris.
The French salt. I'll make sure to use the
Yeah, French salt, kosher salt,
Oh.
like.
And if you want to throw rosemary in the pot while you boil your potatoes, we won't tell.
Chris, let's do it.
For the first batch, let's skip the rosemary. But yeah, definitely report back. We're at the height of summer. We missed July 4th by a few days, but at your next summer picnic, highly recommend whether you're making barbecue, whether you're grilling up steaks, whether you're serving hot dogs. These are an excellent side. So easy to make. Like I said, can feed a crowd. And people will love them. They will rave about them. So I can't recommend it enough. And then if you do have some left over, you can crush them, you can mash them, you can make potato salad and cut them up. They're that versatile.
So they keep pretty. I know Daniel had said about it, like made in the fridge and then reheated. That's a good place, or you just have them from cold.
So I will just eat them. I will eat them cold. I will also dice them up, throw them in a pan, crisp them up with some pastrami, some corned beef, and some onions.
And again, not to drift too far away from the Heartland Hot Dish kind of discussion, any kind of starches that you make cool and then reheat are much better for your body to absorb. Like instant starch cooking. So like that's the game of rice. Like if you cook rice and you eat it straight away versus cook rice, let it go cold and then reheat it, your body works in a different way to to consume those starches, it makes for a much better dietary experience.
Look at me, a paragon of health.
So it's interesting you say that because as a cycling athlete,
Yep.
I've eaten these on the bike.
Oh,
Cold.
really?
Yeah, because
This is
carbs,
traveling food.
and
Ooh.
salt. Yeah, think about it. Think about how little they are, and you can
I
just
just
pop
want a
one in your
Cornish
mouth.
pasty.
Yeah.
And if you're sending your kids off to cold bus stop in the winter, some boiled potatoes in the
Cargo
pocket.
pants, yeah. Cargo pants.
That seems completely normal.
Pocket potato.
And what I would say was I think that this is one of those that you've probably maybe never heard of, or if you've passing kind of shot listening to this, it is to go try them. It really isn't difficult. I think the thing that we didn't touch on mostly is a nice small new potato. Be careful with those fingerlings, because sometimes those fingerlings, while they look small, are fully developed potatoes. And so they're not always, if you can get those small little round potatoes that are newer in season are good. I think Daniel had said it like a waxy potato, you just want a low starch content. When you're talking about your low starch content, there's a way to measurement of doing it. I think there's the guys, Chef Steps. They've got one where they put salty brine liquid and you can have a float or not float in a different percentage of liquid. It's a good video to watch if you ever want to make French fries. It's a good way to judge how much starch in your potato. So I just don't be scared. Even if it's not the right potato, it'll be okay. Thank you so, so much, my lovelies, for tuning in and listening to today's episode of the Heartland Hot Dish podcast. Hit that like button, subscribe, and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us grow and reach more listeners just like you. Until next time, keep savoring the flavors of the Heartland and sharing the love for this vibrant community. Take care and stay connected.